A girl who once had to dig through trash cans for food, who was once rejected by America simply because of the color of her skin, went on to become the queen of the Paris stage, a wartime spy, a sensual icon, and a name the FBI monitored for years. Her name was Josephine Baker. But if you think this is only the story of a dancer in the famous banana skirt, believe me, you have only touched the golden surface of a life full of cracks. She was called the Black Pearl, the Bronze Venus, and the Princess of Europe's hottest stages. Picasso was once fascinated by her. Hemingway once described her as a phenomenon people could not take their eyes off. But her own homeland refused to let her walk through many doors. The wildest part is that Josephine Baker did not only perform in front of aristocrats and millionaires, she also secretly served the French Resistance, carried information hidden in sheet music, concealed documents beneath her costumes, and used her own spotlight to pass through places ordinary people would never have been allowed to enter. So, was Josephine Baker a saint of justice or a star who knew how to use everything, including her body and scandal, to survive in a brutal world? The answer is not simple, and that is why her story still haunts classic Hollywood to this day. If you want me to explore any more movies, TV shows, or Hollywood secrets, just comment right below. And I'm Ryan. Please like and subscribe to the channel to start exploring the main content of this video with me. Born in the Shadows. Before Paris called her a queen, Josephine Baker was only a child born among the harsh streets of St. Louis, Missouri in 1903. Her birth name was Frida Josephine McDonald, a very ordinary name for a life that would be anything but ordinary. From the moment she was born, the story of her identity was covered in mystery, especially the questions surrounding her biological father and the circumstances of her mother giving birth in a hospital that was almost exclusively for white people. That detail was not small in early 20th century America, where racial segregation still divided every chance at survival. No one can say anything with certainty, but that suspicion alone says a great deal about the world Josephine was born into. A world where the identity, opportunities, and fate of poor black people were often decided by the invisible hands of privilege. Josephine's childhood had no silk, no glamour, and no stage lights. When she was only 8 years old, she had to work in the homes of wealthy white families, cleaning, babysitting, and enduring treatment no child should ever have had to experience. She did return to school for a short time, but poverty did not allow her to stay there for long. At 13, Josephine left home and worked as a waitress in a club. During that same period, she married Willie Wells, but the marriage fell apart after only a few weeks. 13 years old, already working, already married and divorced. That shows just how quickly she was pushed out of childhood. By the age of 15, Josephine had been married twice and was working full-time for wages so low that there were moments when she had to look for leftover food in public trash cans. Before the banana skirt, before the diamonds, before the applause, she knew very well what it felt like to be hungry, looked down on, and forced to survive on her own. Perhaps those years were what created Josephine Baker's unmistakable energy. When she stepped onto the stage, she was not just dancing to entertain. She danced as if she were kicking open the door of fate. She joined black traveling performance troupes when she was still very young. But even in the world of entertainment, racial prejudice was always standing in front of her. In 1922, Josephine got an opportunity in the touring musical Shuffle Along and began making audiences remember her with her humor, mischievous eyes, and a body that could tell a story. But America at that time was still not ready to recognize a black woman who was too free. Then Paris appeared, with an offer to perform for $1,000 a month. For a girl who had once clung to every meal that was not just money, it was an escape, a door. And the moment Josephine Baker's life began to change direction. Paris creates La Baker. In 1925, Josephine Baker arrived in Paris. And I have to be honest, the European stage was not ready for the storm called Josephine Baker. Paris had seen many beautiful women, many singers, many dancers, but Josephine entered the city like a bolt of electricity. At 19, she appeared at the Folies Bergère and quickly became a phenomenon. It was not just a successful performance, but a cultural explosion. Parisian audiences saw in her something bold, new, seductive, and dangerous in a way the old society did not know how to control. The skirt, made of loosely strung bananas, became Josephine's most famous image. But that costume both gave her power and placed her inside an imaginary cage created by the audience's gaze. She knew she was being watched like something strange, but instead of being swallowed by it, she turned that gaze into a stage of her own. This is where the story becomes complicated. Josephine was a victim of prejudice, but she also knew how to use that very prejudice to push herself to the top. She made white European audiences stare with their mouths open, then made them pay applaud and remember her name. Writers, painters, high society, and thrill seekers were all pulled into Josephine's orbit. Picasso once painted her, and Hemingway once praised her powerful impact. While others saw her as an exotic symbol, Josephine was quietly building a personal empire. What made her different was that she was not only sensual. She was funny, clever, self-mocking, and knew how to catch the audience off guard. When people thought she had only come to seduce them, she made them laugh. When people thought she was only entertainment, she became a cultural icon. Josephine's performances were a whirlwind of Charleston hip movements, satirical facial expressions, and unpredictable energy. She danced like she was breaking the rules and smiled as if she knew a secret the audience had not yet understood. And Paris completely surrendered. But the very thing that made Paris worship her also frightened many other places. Josephine's shows were once protested in Europe. In Vienna, church bells rang before and during her performance, like a moral warning sent to the audience. In Zagreb, the opposition was even more intense. Protesters targeted the theater, forcing the show to shut down. It is hard to believe that a woman on stage could make moral and religious organizations feel so threatened. Josephine was not carrying a weapon. She was simply taking ownership of her own body. But in a society that wanted women, especially women of color, to stay silent and small, her presence became an act of rebellion. Success came very quickly. By the age of 21, Josephine had become a millionaire. The girl who once knew the smell of poverty was now buying a golden piano, owning a bed connected to Marie Antoinette, and walking through rooms that made even the wealthy turn their heads. She also had a pet cheetah that often appeared with her. That animal sometimes leapt into the orchestra pit, making the crowd scream and laugh with excitement. If this were a movie, the scene would almost seem too exaggerated to believe. But that contrast is exactly what makes Josephine's story both dazzling and painful. Her hair, costumes, movements, eyes, and posture all became part of her brand. The French called her La Baker. Just those two syllables were enough to evoke a legend that went beyond the stage, beyond fashion, and beyond the press. But the first dark side of glory also began here. Josephine was praised as the embodiment of black beauty. But at the same time, she was trapped inside the strange fantasies Europe projected onto her body. She was freer than many women of her time, But that freedom was still sold through tickets advertisements and seen through eyes that were both fascinated and prejudiced. While Paris threw flowers at her feet, America still did not know how to accept her. When she returned to her homeland, she did not receive the same honor. A black woman who was too rich, too famous, too confident, and too difficult to control could still be stopped at the doors of hotels and restaurants, or treated as if her international fame meant nothing at all. In 1937, Josephine married Jean Lyon and became a French citizen while also giving up her American citizenship. That act felt like a cut from the place that had given birth to her. By the early 1950s, La Baker was already a legend in France. But she did not only want to be loved, she wanted the world to change. And that was when the stage star began stepping into places far more dangerous than theater lights. The star becomes a spy. In 1939, war broke out. Paris, the city that had given Josephine its heart, began trembling under the shadow of fascism. Refugees poured in. Elegant rooms were no longer enough to hide the fear. And Josephine, instead of only standing on stage, walked straight into the city's pain. After her performances, she went to a shelter for the homeless on Rue de Chevalerie. She made beds, cared for the elderly, and comforted people who had just fled from war. Think about Ty Maget, a superstar wearing dazzling costumes at night, then bending down to help others immediately afterward. This detail always touches me. Because many stars use the word humanitarian like a piece of jewelry, Josephine walked into the room where people were exhausted, frightened, homeless, and she did the most ordinary things. No cameras, no stage, no diamond necklace. Then the summer of 1940 arrived. Paris was occupied, and Josephine Baker, a woman many had once viewed as a symbol of stage pleasure, became a link in the French resistance. Believe me, this part sounds like a spy movie, but it belongs to the real story of her life. Josephine's fame was the perfect disguise. She had a reason to travel. She was invited to embassies' parties and meetings with officials. Places where others were stopped, she could enter with a smile, dresses, music, and the status of an international star. At those parties, she listened. She talked. She charmed when necessary. She gathered information about troop positions, airfields, and things the Germans and their allies did not want leaked. Behind the wine glasses and the lights, Josephine was playing a life-or-death game of chess. Her colleague agent Jacques Abte posed as her assistant. Information was written in invisible ink on sheet music. Some important images were carried by her beneath her costumes. Fame, the thing that had once turned her into an object to be stared at, now became a shield that helped her get past inspections. Unbelievable, right? The woman who had once been judged through her body used the very fact that she was underestimated to serve the war. Powerful men saw her as a dancer, a sensual symbol, a party star. They did not see a fighter, and that was their mistake. Josephine Baker understood the gaze of others very well. She had lived her whole life under that gaze, so during the war, she knew how to turn it into a weapon. Not a gun, not a knife, but fame charm, and the ability to make people lower their guard. There is a quote attributed to her saying that France had made her who she was, that the people of Paris had given her their hearts, and that she was ready to give them her life. However it is phrased, the spirit is clear. Josephine did not see France only as a stage. She saw it as her chosen homeland. The contrast here is almost cruel. She could enter palaces, meet royalty, and approach diplomatic circles. But when she returned to America, that very same woman could be denied a hotel room or a cup of coffee. International fame could not erase skin color in the eyes of a segregated society. Fighting her own country. After the war, Josephine did not stop at being an artistic icon. She moved her fight to another front, the civil rights front. And this was when America could no longer treat her simply as a glamorous star across the Atlantic. She began challenging the system on American soil. In 1951, she toured the United States with a special condition in her contract. The theaters where she performed had to allow any ticket-holding audience member to enter regardless of skin color. That was not a small detail. It was a direct blow against segregation rules that had long been treated as normal. Think about it. An artist could simply take the money, perform, and leave. Josephine set a condition. She used her commercial appeal to force venues to open their doors. This was the moment when glamour turned into political pressure. And I love that detail because it shows that she understood the value of soft power. But America did not give in easily. When Josephine arrived in New York with her husband, at the time, the two were turned away from many hotels. The number often repeated is 36 hotels. 36 doors closed in front of a woman worshipped by all of Paris. That is hard to swallow. A person who had performed before Europe's elite, who had supported the resistance, who was admired as an international symbol, still could not be treated decently in her own homeland. If there is one scene that captures Josephine's wound, perhaps it is that scene. And then the FBI started watching her. Not because she had committed a violent crime, not because she threatened anyone with a weapon. The agency monitored her because of her anti-racist statements, because she was seen as having views against America because she demanded equality too loudly. Josephine's file was said to be 471 pages long. That number sounds like a spy story, but it reflects the system's fear of a famous woman who refused to stay silent. She was not just a singer. In the eyes of those who wanted everything to stay the same, she was a political problem. For about 15 years, her activities were recorded, analyzed, and labeled. She was called a communist sympathizer, partly because she had appeared in circles connected to Cuba and the Castro brothers. But deeper than that, what frightened people was the image of a world without racial borders that she tried to present. I think this is the secret classic Hollywood often avoids. Josephine was not dangerous because she danced. She was dangerous because she proved that a black woman could be famous, wealthy, independent, loved internationally, and still use her voice to point directly at hypocrisy. On August 28, 1963, Josephine Baker stood at the March on Washington. She was the only woman allowed to speak alongside Martin Luther King Jr. before a massive crowd. That image is so powerful that I always see it as a historical movie scene that needs no staging. She wore her French military uniform, not a stage dress, not feathers, not a performance costume. That uniform spoke for a lifetime of fighting. She stood there not only as an artist, but as someone who had served one country in war and now returned to demand justice from the country that had given birth to her. Before about 250,000 people, she spoke about her own struggle. She looked at a sea of multiracial people and used the image of salt and pepper to say that this mixture was what was right. The lines sounded simple, but behind it was an entire life divided by skin color. I want you to notice this. Josephine did not stand on the civil rights stage as a perfect symbol. She stood there with all her contradictions. A woman who had once earned money from a sensual image exoticized by Europe. A woman once rejected by her homeland. A mother, an artist, a spy, a woman watched by the FBI. And that is exactly why she feels more real. Josephine was not a polished marble statue. she was a human being with wounds, ambition, mistakes, bold choices, and courage. Hollywood likes to turn people into saints or tear them down, but real life often exists in between, where light and darkness live together. The Rainbow Dream and Final Curtain. Starting in 1954, Josephine Baker began adopting children from different countries, including Japan, Algeria, Israel, Colombia, and many others. She called the family her Rainbow Tribe, hoping to prove that people of every race, color, and nationality could live together in love. The idea was as beautiful as a humanitarian dream. At Château de Milande, an old castle in the Dordogne Valley of France, 12 children from many cultures grew up under the roof of an international icon. But like many things in Josephine's life, behind that beauty were very real pressures. To maintain the castle, care for her children, and keep that dream alive, Josephine needed a great deal of money. From the late 1950s to 1975, she had to keep returning to the stage, taking work whenever she could, while her fame was no longer as bright as when she was the young star Paris chased after. That makes the story bittersweet. The woman who had once lived among golden pianos, diamond-collared cheetahs, and packed theaters eventually had to struggle with debts, bills, and the fear of losing her home. The spotlight was still there, but it had dimmed under the weight of real life. In the end, Josephine lost Château de Milande. It was not only the loss of a property, but the loss of the symbol of the family dream she had built outside the stage lights. After that, Grace Kelly, who was then Princess Grace of Monaco, helped her and her children find a new place to live. In 1975, Josephine returned to the Paris stage. The public still remembered her, still applauded her warmly, and she still had the ability to make an entire room light up. After poverty, war, racism, scandal, and loss, Josephine stood under the lights again as if Paris were giving her back a piece of its old love. But soon after that moving triumph, Josephine Baker died in her sleep from a cerebral hemorrhage. Around 20,000 people mourned her in the streets of Paris. A poor little girl from St. Louis, once looked down on by America, was finally sent off by a city across the ocean as a legend. Looking back at Josephine Baker's entire life, it is hard to simply call her a saint or a sinner. She was not perfect, but it is exactly that complexity that made her great. She used sensuality as a tool of power while also being exploited by the entertainment system. She both controlled the stage and had meanings imposed on her body by audiences. She was worshipped as an icon and watched as a threat. Josephine Baker was not just the banana skirt, the Paris smile, the FBI file, or the mother of the Rainbow Tribe. She was a major fault line of the 20th century, connecting poverty with luxury, the stage with war, sexuality with politics, and fame with loss. When America wanted her to stay small, she went to Paris and became enormous. When war came, she turned the spotlight into a cover for courage. And when life pulled her down again and again, she still returned to the stage as if her heart had never given up. And perhaps that is the first lesson from Josephine Baker. Not everyone born in darkness has to remain there. But to step out of it, sometimes people must become sharper than the world that wounded them. Josephine did not only dream, she calculated, endured, took risks, and recreated herself again and again. The second lesson is even harder. Fame does not heal every wound. It can buy diamonds, castles, and golden pianos, but it cannot automatically buy peace. It can make crowds applaud, but it cannot stop hotel doors from closing in your face. The third lesson is that real power is not only about being seen. It is about how you use that gaze. Josephine was stared at by the world, judged, desired, and suspected. But she also used that very gaze to carry information across war lines, to force theaters to open their doors, and to speak about justice. And the final lesson, perhaps the one I want to keep most, is this. People do not have to be perfect to create something good. Josephine Baker had contradictions, controversial decisions, and chapters of her life that still make people debate. But she also left behind a legacy of courage, boldness, and belief that another world could exist. Her story is not a fairy tale. It is a sad jazz tune, sometimes dazzling, sometimes unstable, sometimes rebellious, sometimes broken. It contains laughter on stage, protest bells outside a church, the sound of secret files turning in an FBI office, and the final applause of Paris. If Josephine Baker's story made you think, leave a comment and tell me, do you see her as a symbol of freedom, a controversial star, or a woman who did everything she could to survive and change the world in her own way? Hit like if you want this channel to keep digging into the buried secrets of old Hollywood. Subscribe to Ryan's Hollywood Uncovered if you love stories where the red carpet lights never tell the whole truth. And don't forget to comment the person, movie, or classic scandal you want me to explore next. Thank you for staying until the very last minute. I'll see you in the next videos, where we will continue stepping past the red velvet, opening old doors, and looking straight at the scars Hollywood once tried to hide.